Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When I appeared here, I was not too sure whether I'm worthy of this audience because I am a simple news reporter, and that's what I've been doing for a long time. When Kwesi Pratt called me, inviting me to this forum, I didn't know that the gathering will be so august, almost intimidating. Alhaji Hudu Yaya, Sylvanus Tamaklo, Leo Kran, people who have been members of parliament, who have sung the slogans, and people who we read about in school. But I'll do my best to discharge the duty according to the research that is available to me, which I'll share with all of you. At the outset, though, I have to set out political philosophy. And Comrade Chicho Poku, when he was calling both of us comrades, looked at me with a smile, wondering whether I am a comrade. I don't know whether I'm qualified to do that, but I set out as a socialist, as I believed in the beginning as an undergraduate student. My first encounter with order and life would be with the Catholic Church, and I was being groomed as a mass boy. So in Burma camp where I grew up, I followed Father Kumesi, Lieutenant Colonel Kumesi then he was, as one of his favorite mass boys. And the key expressions of the Catholic Church is with the communion service. And in the communion service, you will identify the equality of men, the way in which the Catholic Church perceives it. The Father discharges the communion to all men in the same manner. And so equality of men and that kind of socialism sort of influenced me at the beginning. Of course, born in the mid-70s to a young army officer, I was around about 5 to 6 years old when the 31st December coup occurred. And in those days, I lived in Burma camp, a place called St. Anthony Lane. And it was very close to the command headquarters and very close to the house of the brigade commander then. His name was Colonel Labana. And so the leaders of the coups struck excitement in a lot of the army officers, the younger army officers, the lieutenants and the captains at that time. I was later to learn that that excitement that the coup struck in the army officers was because a lot of them were concerned about the attitude of Mr. Riley Poku, who was the Minister of Defense at the time, and it was thought that he did not treat the army officers well. So later on I understood it. But by this time my father was a captain, and so the names of Aloga Akatapori, Zarayebo, Yen Yen, were names that I heard regularly. I associated with them even though I didn't know them, and it struck a certain positive impact of something that I didn't quite understand. Later on, though, I was to find out that these heroes of the revolution became renegades of the PNDC, as it was told that the PNDC did a U-turn in its own political philosophy sometime around 1983. Then, as an undergraduate, I was part of those who chanted the slogans of Che Guevara, of Chris Hani. We sang Inkonto Wesizwe. We used to sing Cho Cholozo as if that will bring Mandela out of prison, but it didn't. We were also buoyed by the maltreatment that the United States meted out, especially to Fidel Castro and Cuba. We were also buoyed in this position when we read about the civil rights movement, about Martin Luther King, about the blessed Elijah Muhammad, who actually begat Malcolm X, and who then recruited Cassius Clay to become a key part of the whole civil rights movement. Cassius, of course, became Ali and ended up as one of the celebrated sportsmen of all time. So being socialist was great. It was the in thing to be. It was fighting university authorities and singing the slogans. That was what it was at the time. But then, as I proceeded along, I read about freedoms and the inalienable rights of men, that these were guaranteed by God. I noticed that our first Republican Constitution did not have a clear human rights guaranteed charter. I read some of the cases in law school, and I realized that arguments had been made in Ghana in the courts that were successfully made against what I thought was the inalienable rights of men. Then I became born again, so I sort of read also the Bible, and I began to accept that the central theme of man is God. I subscribe to the tenets of the God of Abraham, who revealed himself as Elohim in Christ. And it seemed to me that center-right political philosophy to discharge the obligations that God had placed upon man in the Garden of Eden became a spontaneous order. I understood capitalism to mean individual initiative to be developed under freedom and the right for individuals to reap their labor, and that the consumer is the most important person in the whole equation. So I also read in those days the epistles of Dr. J.B. Dankwa. I was influenced by Margaret Thatcher and the kinds of things she did. I noticed that when England changed to Tony Blair, he pursued almost the same center-rightist policies of Margaret Thatcher, and he described it as New Labour. It occurred to me then that perhaps being center-right maybe is the way to go. And then I became quite disappointed with what happened in Angola, because the battle between the MPLA and UNITA was one of the central themes of conversation, and it was one of the central themes that divided the center-right people and the center-left people. Eventually, the MPLA won the war, but the post-war Angola was more capitalist than anyone could think. In fact, today, Angola and Luanda is the most expensive country to live in. Eduardo dos Santos' daughter is the richest African woman. And so these things sort of strengthened my resolve that perhaps this whole left-wing thing that we had done through the university and the Che Guevara and all of that, just perhaps required a bit more research for us to draw a conclusion. You look at the situation in South Africa today, the people whose slogans we used to chant, Cyril Ramaphosa, Tokyo Sexuale, Jacob Zuma, if you look at the way in which they conduct affairs, it's very, very far from the letter of socialism. And these matters sort of strengthen the resolve that perhaps we have to have another look at this philosophy that we are acquainted with. Not that Cyril is doing anything wrong, but in terms of the letter of socialism that was preached widely in those days, and if you look at what has happening now, it may well be that they had also changed the philosophy, as indeed did the PNDC in 1983, which set out also as a socialist group. Then I looked at President Kufuor when he took office in 2001, and since the time of Kwame Nkrumah, the record will indicate that no other president has achieved such important social interventions as President Kufuor, who should normally be a center-right person, did. And sort of all of that influenced me. So I'm just saying this at the outset so that the distinguished audience will know where I have come from and where I have struggled towards, so that that will definitely influence the kinds of things I said. And I had said that I read the epistles of Dankwa and I read it thoroughly. And I have also read Dr. Nkrumah, who is very distinguished, but perhaps that informs the kinds of things that I'll be saying.